Hey YouTube, Joyboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1018 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Not gonna lie guys, I'm a little bit shocked about this one. This was, I've never seen a stronger 11 out of 10 One Piece chapter in my life. My eyes are wide open. Everything about this chapter was so good, and the end is I think it's big, guys. I really think that Oda is working the story towards an imminent reveal about the nature of Joy Boy, which is really not all that surprising considering how Joy Boy's name has come up recently, but this chapter made it feel, for me, so much more real. So let's start with the beginning of the chapter because why not? I said after the last chapter that I thought that the Tama stuff was good, but not great. I think that this chapter definitely elevated it for me. This scene was necessary. I liked how we got to meet individual gifters and their relationship with Tama. Tama, when she greeted them as if she knew them really well, there's something about that makes that more emotional to me. The thumbs up from Daifugu was just, the word for it is cute, okay? It's just cute. Kind of makes me think about how Tama's devil fruit works. It comes off as kind of a slave fruit, right? You feed the Kibidango to the thing and they are now your slave and they will do whatever it is that you want whenever you want. But is there a little bit more nuance to it than that? Because if that fruit is like that, it's questionable fit within the themes of One Piece as a story. So it's like maybe, those who eat the Kibidango have like a deep, intrinsic, and rich understanding of who Tama is and vice versa, which it's like maybe sometimes the fruit doesn't work is basically what I'm suggesting. Like it works because Tama is a person that is worthwhile and fulfilling to follow, and she makes friends with these people because deep down there's legitimate qualities about them which make them friend worthy. I don't know. I suppose the reason that this really comes to mind is because of the context of the chapter itself. Oda had a nice segue from sort of talking about the numbers of the chapters and the gifters to talking about Nami, where Nami comments on Tama's ability saying, wow, it's so powerful. And then Oda describes how Nami did essentially the same thing when it came to Zeus. But Nami doesn't have any devil fruit, which allows enemies to become allies. Nami is just, it's frankly a better person than Big Mom, way more considerate, and she's obviously made Zeus feel more special. And likely the same is true regarding the relationship of the gifters to Kaido. And this obviously isn't just limited to Nami. The sort of thing that I felt like was missing from the chapter was the original person who was sort of hyped as, having the greatest ability on the sea, the ability to turn enemies into allies, and that's Luffy. Luffy also doesn't have a devil fruit which allows him to do that. That's within his nature. So I think that the context of the chapter just makes me naturally think that there might be more to Tama's abilities than simply the power of the devil fruit. It might have something to do with Tama herself, plus the devil fruit. And to take this even a step further, as you get further into the chapter, there's a lot of discourse about slavery and the history of the fishermen. We'll obviously talk about this more in depth a little bit later on, but then you apply that same concept to Tama's abilities and it's like something doesn't add up. It feels wrong if Tama's abilities works like slavery. It almost feels intentional to include these two things within the same chapter. You even go to Nami, right? Zeus is on Nami's side, in part because Zeus feels less like a slave and more like a partner. And I want you to keep this in mind when we talk about the Sun God and we talk about Joy Boy, because again, all of these things being in the same chapter, not a coincidence in my opinion. But yeah, there was a nice transitional piece where Oda zoomed in on CP0 before getting into Who's Who versus Jinbei. Before we get into Who's Who versus Jinbei though, I just thought that a couple things that CP0 said is worthy of noting. First off, it's essentially confirmed that Who's Who is not currently a member of Cypherpole. If he was, then CP0 would know. They say the victor of this is of no consequence to us. We just need to confirm his death. Have we verified his identity? Even if it is him, any confidential information he has should be dated by now anyway. His survival wouldn't harm the government. Allowing a rogue escapee to live would set a bad precedent. Well, who's to say he'll even survive the night? He's facing Jinbei after all. Basically, they're contemplating as to whether or not, if Who's Who survives, whether or not they're going to kill him. It also leaves this lingering detail of he might possess confidential information, which while being dated could still be interesting to us. I'm curious if at some point, I mean, this kind of sets Who's Who on a path to eventually joining the side of the Straw Hats if he lives, because he's going to be a target of the government. Maybe he reveals something, or, you know, that's how One Piece goes anyway. I mean, we have a whole chapter, right, centering around, big concept of it being turning enemies into allies, and then Who's Who versus Jinbei. I just connect these things. So my interpretation of what CP0 says here, along with the events at the end of the chapter, I think Jinbei defeats Who's Who. But is Jinbei going to kill Who's Who? No, of course not. So I think at some point Who's Who does actually become an ally. I know people will say, well, Who's Who is a bad person, holds these biases still against Fishman, just seems to generally disregard some things and is not a sympathetic character, but sometimes these kinds of characters do become allies when they have a common enemy with the Straw Hats. In this case, it could be both Kaido and the government. Particularly after Kaido is defeated, and I'm just gonna be straight up honest with you guys, that seems, I mean, as I'm reading this, it almost seems inevitable, right? One way or another. But yeah, Jinbei versus Who's Who, guys, this fight was so intense. That is the right word. Over the last 20, 25 or so chapters, One Piece has been peak, in my opinion. I think that in retrospect, there's been some people that, you know, for whatever reason, they're complaining, but I think that when you read all of this in a row, you're going to realize how just on the edge of our seats we've constantly been for an extended period of time, and we're still trending upwards. But this fight carried so much emotion, and I really feel as though Oda's been sort of building this kind of emotion over the last couple chapters, like for instance scenes with Kiku and Kinemon. It naturally progresses into something like this as well, where you really feel, okay, this is not a joke. But it also had like a really cool choreographed fight scene as well. This is just, you know, this feels like an old school One Piece battle. But yeah, Who's Who is definitely, in terms of design and powers, probably right now my favorite Flying Six members. He's just freaking cool. Let's just call it what it is. But during this whole fight, what really carried it, even more than the battle itself, was the conversation that was taking place at the same time. Oda, obviously we ended last chapter with the reveal that the Gomu Gomu no Mi has some kind of significance. And so Who's Who explains that, well, he doesn't really hate Luffy, more so he hates Shanks, but because Luffy has Shanks' Straw Hat and the Devil Fruit, it's natural for him to have a grudge against Luffy. And while that's kind of weak a little bit, I can also buy it, you know, because if you hate Shanks this much, it's very clearly telegraphed that Luffy is his protege of sorts, has some sort of, you know, good relationship with him in the past. Having both of these things makes that very clear to me, probably to him, and so, you know, the anger Who's Who has is justified. But what really drove the emotion was when Who's Who decided to say this: if you had tried to block it, you'd have been eaten alive. I didn't think a slimy fishman could move that fast on dry land, Jinbei. Jinbei's response was so boss as well, man. I'm not sure what to say to that. That's like, it reminds me of Luffy back in Jaya, where Bellamy talks all this junk, and Luffy's just like, there's no point even responding to it. But Jinbei does actually respond to it, at least somewhat. It's generally no longer acceptable to express such discriminatory views on fishmen. And Who's Who shrugs it off as if, okay, sure, whatever. Haha, my bad. And then he's reminded of something. He says, that reminds me, there's something else I want to ask about. And we can see at this point in the battle that Who's Who's fangs are actually doing something to Jinbei. He's already talked about, well, You would have been eaten alive by my attack. We saw he got cut earlier. But the fight is still relatively even. They're both hurting each other. Who's Who even says, damn, that hurts. About the thing I wanted to ask you. Back when I was in prison, I heard a story. I was mockingly told to pray to a certain someone for salvation. Apparently, slaves in ancient times believed in a legendary warrior that would eventually come and save them. They called him Sun God, Nika. It was said he would bring laughter to their lips and free them from their suffering. Who knows if he really existed though? My cruel sentence was dragging on for what felt like forever, so I clung on to the legend. I didn't care about the details, I just wanted to be saved. Jimmy says, what does this have to do with me? Who's Who then says, you led the Sun Pirates. I heard the crew was made up of former slaves. Besides, isn't the history of fishermen a history of slavery? And then he uses the finger pistol attack. And you can see Jinbei getting mad. The guard who told me about Nika vanished a few days later without a trace. I figured that maybe the story wasn't meant to be shared, and hearing it put me in danger too, so I risked my life to break out. It's curious, isn't it? I'd love to hear what you know. And then Who's Who's finger pistol, his finger, literally broke against Jinbei's defenses. You even see lines coming off Jinbei like Conqueror's Hockey. That's what it looks like to me. There's like this undertone of this entire conversation, the anger that Jinbei felt. It empowered him. It increased his willpower, basically. It made him stronger. Who's Who literally played himself by bringing these things up because at the start of the chapter, they were of similar strength, and by the end of the chapter, they were not. He says, I have nothing to say to you. There's this sick panel of Jinbei in shadows with, like, smoke rising above his face. Jinbei grimacing in anger, man, that was so cool. Especially because it's so unusual to see Jinbei like this, because usually he's very calm and composed even in the heat of battle, but here he was not. I'm gonna gouge you in half. And Jinbei just takes the attack right to his face and nothing happens. Who's Who even says, damn it, why are you so mad all of a sudden? Jinbei steps on his tail. If you're going to make broad statements about other people's history, you better not be half-assed about it. And he pretty much obliterates his face. And I pretty much think that this battle is over. You guys know I don't blow by blow the entire chapter in a normal review, but this one was absolutely worth it because, wow, there's a lot to unpack here. So let's start off and discuss why exactly Jinbei got mad, because I think that, you know, that's obviously a question that's lingering in the chapter. Oda doesn't spell it out for you, he lets you piece it together. And so Jinbei says, or Who's Who says this, so I clung onto the legend. I didn't care about the details, I just wanted to be saved. Jinbei notes that, but afterwards he doesn't seem mad. He says, what does this have to do with me? He got mad after Who's Who said this. There's even a sound bubble where Jinbei's teeth are clenched. Who's Who says, you led the Sun Pirates. I heard the crew was made up of former slaves. Besides, isn't the history of fishermen a history of slavery? Why would this make Jinbei mad? Well, there's two things, and these things can be true at the same time. First off, I just want to bring this up. We don't know what happened to the rest of the Sun Pirates. It's very possible that they were killed in Big Mom's territory. Jinbei failed to rescue them. We don't know exactly what happened to them. I mean, Jinbei said something, but we haven't actually seen it. So the Sun Pirates could be dead, and Who's Who bringing up them in such a casual way could definitely inspire Jinbei's anger. But I think that even without this, when Who's Who says, isn't the history of fishermen a history of slavery, I personally can see how that would be infuriating to Jinbei or to any fisherman. Isn't the history of fishermen a history of slavery? No, the history of fishermen is much, much more than slavery. When you say it like that, it almost disregards everything else. We aren't just slaves. That does not define us. Long before we were slaves, I think that the fishermen were free. This is kind of alluded to during the Fishman Island arc and throughout the story, but there was this era of slavery which existed within the world of One Piece starting around 1,000 years ago, just before the Void Century, the Tontata talk about it. And we can also see from the Fishmen, there are low-key panels in which it's described that the Fishmen didn't always live in the ocean. At one point in time, they lived on the surface. They were forced down into the ocean to escape from slavery. But it also explains to you in a way that before the Fishmen were slaves, they had a place, a home, a long history and tradition before slavery was a problem. I think that this is what Jinbei means when he says, if you're going to make broad statements about other people's histories, you better not be half-assed about it. He's mad because Who's Who sees the Fishmen as a people of slaves and not something greater than that. But anyway, I find it curious how Oda makes it unclear as to whether Jinbei knows about this legendary sun god Nika or not. It's like you could take it either way. Jinbei has some thought bubbles as if, he has thoughts about what Who's Who's talking about, but he doesn't actually confirm that he knows. The Fishmen do talk about the path to the sun, though, and that's where the name Sun Pirates was inspired from. And I personally have interpreted this for years as essentially meaning that the Fishmen's great plan, their long-held dream, is to return to their home on the surface under the sun with every other peoples. They've basically been in hiding for maybe 1,000 years. So that's what that symbol means to them. It means freedom. And I also interpret this to be the great purpose for the Noah, built a long time ago, is the ship that is destined to take the Fishmen from their place of hiding from the sea back to the surface. When the time is right, when the various evils on the surface are dealt with, and the climate of the whole world changes. And so there's a very obviously, very apparent connection here with the sun god Nika. Apparently slaves in ancient times believed in a legendary warrior who would come and save them. And there's very obvious parallels here with Fisher Tiger as well, a guy who freed slaves under the banner of the name Sun God, and then you had the leader of the Sun Pirates, Fisher Tiger, right? There's definitely parallels here. Are they direct? Is this the image that Fisher Tiger had in mind, or is this just a coincidence? I tend to think that it's not, but I just want to make you guys aware that the name Sun God is not new in the story. It's been brought up at least twice before. There was a sun god mentioned in Elbaf, and there was a sun god mentioned in Skypiea. So this Nika figure could be particular to some of these other groups, and maybe not the Fishmen, but I tend to think that all of them sort of share this general mythology, mostly because it's not a mythology, it's truth. Nika, the sun god, or whatever his name actually was, he existed. The thing which combines the giants and the Skypieans and the Fishmen is the ancient kingdom, right? Skypieans were tasked with guarding poneglyphs, so were the Fishmen, and likely so were the giants. In particular, the giants and Fishmen are not humans. The Skypieans can be seen in a similar way. We know that even though it's illegal, still nowadays, the celestial dragons and other people purchase exotic, quote-unquote, peoples in the slave trade. And that depending on what kind of exotic creature you are, giant, mermaid, whatever, it carries a price. Essentially, if you are different from regular humans, the celestial dragons want to own you and view you as lesser than. This was likely true during the Void Century as well. A theory that I made a long time ago, one of the first ones that really blew up on my channel, was basically this. Like, this has been my headcanon, that the ancient kingdom fought with or for the various tribes and groups spread out across the world, and was generally against slavery being enacted by, supported by the various kingdoms, the ruling class of regular humans in the world. The Tontata described the era of slavery, and that was initiated by the Doflamingo family of Dressrosa. Doflamingo family became the Celestial Dragons, right? One of the families of the Celestial Dragons. And in general, we learned from Clover that his speculation was that during the Void Century, the 20 Kingdoms and Doflamingo and those people fought against the ancient kingdom. And if you guys don't know, my running theory has been for a long time now that the ancient kingdom was a kingdom of pirates. So this kingdom of pirates, who traveled the seas and visited and befriended all of these various groups, took it upon themselves to fight for them and saw them through shared experiences as equals and not as lesser than. And the enemy in this regard was what became the government and the celestial dragons. I want to share with you something that's gone viral over the past couple hours on social medias. This is the source for this is the book, The Encyclopedia of Things That Never Were by Michael Page and Robert Ingpen. You can buy this book on Amazon. I've already ordered it. But it's essentially a book about various mythological characters from various cultures. The encyclopedia of things that never were, I guess. I'm not sure. But somebody obviously read this book and took a picture of the section that it has on a character called Joy Boy, the West Indian character who personifies the human need to dance, sing, and jubilate. He is a relation of the Lord of the Dancers who inspires festivals in colder countries, and it seems likely that he traveled to the Caribbean with an early shipment of slaves. From West Africa, Joy Boy smiles perpetually at all the foibles and problems of mankind, and cures human troubles by tapping out an irresistible rhythm on his drum. Whoever hears the music of Joy Boy is compelled to dance and sing along until he or she has shaken the black cloak of despair from his shoulders. Some jazz players claim to have captured Joy Boy's rhythms, but their efforts are a pale imitation of the dance frenzy which can keep humans dancing until they drop. And then there's a picture, I can't show it here, of a representation of Joy Boy, which looks very similar to the shadow that we can see from this chapter of the sun god Nika. And you can tell by these descriptions that there are a ton of similarities between the sun god Nika and Joy Boy, this character from East Indian mythology. Guys, I was going to argue, even without this, that the sun god Nika was Joy Boy, but this just makes it so absurdly easy it's laughable. In my opinion, without a doubt, this was Oda's inspiration for the character Joy Boy, that he, purchased reference materials for various mythological characters from various cultures. He stumbled upon this and decided, yep, this is the guy. This is who's going to be the hero of my story. We've obviously talked about this at length in many, many videos, but I just want to reiterate that it is my interpretation that Oda's views are basically about how to save the world incorporates joy heavily to end all the various problems of mankind. Oda's solution seems to be pretty regularly to bring people together and have them share their joy, and also probably to begin to eliminate power imbalances as well. A great example of this is Skypiea, right, where there was a long-standing rivalry feud between the Skypieans and the Shandians. What eventually happened is they had a common enemy in Enel. Enel destroyed the Skypieans' home. The Skypieans were forced to integrate with the Shandians, and then they partied. They shared their joy. If you go back and actually read the end of the Skypiea arc, they're showing this party pretty, over the course of several panels, and you can see Luffy dancing in shadow. Luffy looks just like the sun god Nika, basically. They got a greater understanding for, appreciation for, and experience with this other group that they had decided that they hated and were so different from themselves. And this is what brought them together. Maybe shared pain and shared joy. For 400 years, right, the Skypieans dictated the rules because the Skypieans were stronger than the Shandians. The Skypieans forced the Shandians away from their homeland, took it over, presumably wouldn't let them into their city itself. And so eventually Enel came in and took the endless Verth from them, then destroyed their home, and the Skypieans didn't really have the ability to dictate anymore. And in bringing down this shared enemy, they didn't seem to have the desire to. And once together, not fighting against each other for anything, they realized that they weren't different. Which I find to be very fitting in this case because Oda later revealed in a cover story that the Skypians and the Shandians originally shared a home as well, on the moon. They have an ancient past together, long forgotten, separated not by race or by culture, but maybe only by class. I personally think that looking into the conflict in the Sky Islands is a little snapshot of what's likely going to happen in the greater scheme of the story. Like, for instance, with the fishmen. I think that Oda's plan with the fishmen is to have them go up to the surface, live under the sun with everybody else, have a shared enemy, basically bring down the establishment to a degree, and then share their pain and joy together and find out that fishmen, despite appearances, aren't different from humans, and that'll help heal the world. We've also talked about at length the importance of music and partying and smiles as well a lot recently in the story. Oda's clearly going somewhere with this, and it perfectly correlates with this East Indian mythology of Joy Boy. Whoever hears the music of Joy Boy is compelled to dance and sing along until he or she has shaken the black cloak of despair from their shoulders. Joy Boy, a character who smiles perpetually, curing human troubles with music. Just as Who's Who says about the sun god Nika, it was said he would bring laughter to their lips and free them from their sufferings. It seems quite obvious to me that laughter and joy is definitely the panacea in One Piece. And it's so fitting too, because One Piece has made it, being on YouTube, it brings together so many people from across the world. One Piece isn't just talking about it, it's doing it. It's bringing people together, allowing people from many different backgrounds to share their joy together. It helps us understand each other and make us nakama. We are all laughing at the same thing. One Piece, curing the world one joke at a time. I know that a lot of people want to believe, or at least are discussing the possibility, that somebody other than Luffy is Joy Boy, but these connections here, it can't be anybody else. It almost describes the sun god as a kind of person that, fights for people who can't necessarily fight for themselves, not evenly at any rate. I think that it's through this power imbalance that atrocities are perpetuated and hatred and anger cycles. The celestial dragons can do what they like and continue all this because nobody opposes them. Nobody can oppose them. But this isn't spelled out like humans are inherently bad, because we see the reverse in Arlong Park, who has the power. Arlong does. Nobody can oppose him. So in that case, Luffy fights for the humans. It's reversed. The constant here is that the more powerful group takes advantage, internally fueled by prejudices and likely fear. And this relates to things such as class, which is not tied to any race or culture. This is really the backdrop of what's going on at the end of the chapter, in my opinion, based on obviously a lot of theories, but I think that this is leading towards a lot of those theories being confirmed. And I think Oda is preparing us and preparing the story for Joy Boy. Remember, it's been prophesied that Joy Boy will appear in Wano. Now, it's coming. I have so much I want to say and speculate about this, but I know that I probably shouldn't go all the way. But, it's like, I think that at some point in time I think Blackbeard's going to become the main enemy of the story. And I think that he's going to destroy the Celestial Dragon's home. He's going to take away their power and lead to a situation in which the entire world can unify against one person and eliminate those power discrepancies. Force integration, force shared experience, the sharing of pain, and then the sharing of joy. And I think that's how One Piece is going to end. Something like that at any rate. Just one of those things of, I feel like what the cause of a lot of conflict in the world is fear, whether it's recognized and acknowledged or not. Fear of people who do things differently than you, believe something different, or value different things, or just, simply look different, or how these things contribute to history. I personally think that there's a lot of people out there who almost need to believe that the way that they do things is the right way. And it's almost like an insecurity, and an insecurity is a kind of fear. Like your way of life is threatened by other ways of life. This leads people to sort of bunker down and protect themselves from anything which might change the way that they perceive the world. We almost naturally segregate ourselves along these lines, further exacerbating mistrust. But I hope that you understand that the conversation is a lot deeper than I can express in a few minutes. And I think that fear leads to a lot of delusion. I've read studies where it's suggested that fear might be a component in people developing schizophrenia, literal and tangible hallucination and delusion. While it is good to be cognizant of potential dangers, I don't think that dangers and fears should rule your life. But for many people they do, and they teach these fears to their children. One of the central ideas of Buddhism, which I think heavily inspires One Piece, is acquiring knowledge and understanding, not only of the world and its peoples, but of yourself as well. This is the path towards both internal and external peace, enlightenment. And I think you can probably see how this applies to One Piece. There's a lot of things that Luffy and others should be fearing. It is rational, it is understandable to fear these things. You're living a dangerous life. At any point in time, you could be killed, you could be stabbed in the back, you acquire these allies you don't know. Why do you trust them? But I think one of the messages here is to put aside your fear and accept that there's some things that you can't control, but there's a way to make the world better. And it necessitates rising above that. Not just for one group or peoples, but for everybody. And the only way that anybody is ever going to get over these fears is by living with and understanding the people that they fear, while on equal footing. Because the truth is, very likely, even despite power differences between the two groups, the Celestial Dragons fear the Fishmen as much as the Fishmen would fear the Celestial Dragons. And that's likely the initial source of their conflict. But yeah, at this point I'm kind of rambling, but this is just something that I felt like I wanted to talk about, because I think that we're soon, to get to the point where these concepts start mattering a lot more. And it certainly mattered a lot more in this chapter, in order to fully, I think, appreciate what was being said between the lines, I think. But obviously there's still a lot that I haven't even said. I don't even think I brought up the word the dawn, right? But dawn and the symbol of the sun interrelates perfectly. Some of this almost feels so self-explanatory at this point that, you get it, right? You see what's taking place and you see where Oda's going. This is obviously just a theory, but One Piece, to me, pretty obviously is the world united whole. It's split into pieces, it needs to be brought together. Oda is giving us a story about how such a future could actually take place. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed the time-lapse illustration and the drawing that Revujo provides every single week, there's a link in the description for some amazing artwork that you should check out. There's a discount going on, 20% off. This shit looks good on your wall. But yeah, this was an incredible chapter of One Piece from page 1 to the last one. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.